You know, with all the threats we are facing to our country by those in our own government who are attempting to make America a communist or socialist country, it is ridiculous to think that we must also deal with the damaging level of immaturity that is continually being displayed by many of our politicians over the simplest of things. What the heck is happening in modern politics? Let's talk about it. Okay, it is no secret that Donald Trump has begun tearing down the east wing of the White House to build a formal ballroom, and liberal Democrats have been losing their minds over it. For some crazy reason, Democrats have attributed the building of this ballroom to one more reason they believe that Donald Trump is attempting to crown himself King of America. Now, to any reasonable person, it should be clear that such a claim is absolute nonsense, as there is no way that any sitting president can proclaim himself king. There are just too many constitutional safeguards in place designed specifically to prevent this type of thing from ever happening. Yet, despite knowing this, Democratic leadership, activists, and liberal legacy media seem to spend much of their time insisting that Trump is building his ballroom as a means to celebrate himself as a king. It is also clear that they only promote said talking point to emotionally enrage their base against Trump because, let's face it, they know that he can never appoint himself king. So, as this relatively minor issue has been made into such a grandiose threat of Donald Trump attempting to destroy America, let's look at how most of us average Americans probably think this whole ballroom fiasco should have been handled through the level of maturity we all expect from our elected leaders who claim to have our best interests at heart. We'll begin with the understanding that as our country is dangerously teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, financial maturity would have dictated that bipartisan leadership should have come together to reach an honest assessment as to whether spending money on a grand ballroom is actually warranted for the beneficial operations of the government. We know that in November of 2009 and October of 2016, then President Barack Obama had to erect a very large heated tent on the South Lawn to host state visits from the prime ministers of India and Italy. He had to do that because the current facilities of the state dining room in the White House are only capable of hosting approximately 200 guests. So, state hosted functions can at times be limited by space. However, with that said, as the necessity of using a tent to host state dinners have been so rare, one would conclude that being financially responsible over the issue of spending taxpayer funds to build a new ballroom would have been deemed unnecessary. Now, through the lens of a mature perspective, it is evident that much of what Donald Trump is doing for the country is a good thing. Yet we also know that Donald Trump is seemingly an ego driven person and someone who is not accustomed to not getting anything that he may want, regardless of how elaborate his want may be. And let's face it, there is no doubt that he wants a fancy ballroom in the White House. That much is clear by what the schematics of the ballroom reveals. But here's the kicker. Donald Trump has forged a way to pay for the ballroom he wants without having to use taxpayer dollars. He himself and private donors are footing the bill, so there is no financial concern present over the country's debt crisis. This is where mature bipartisan leadership who openly claim to be so concerned about our government's budget should be reassured about the ballroom being built. After all, if taxpayers don't have to pay the bill, why not have an event room that would alleviate any possible need for outside tents in the future? Yet still, as most of us Americans must be financially responsible with our own wants, we probably all believe our government should be as well. Hence, mature, bipartisan leadership, after accepting that building this ballroom would not negatively affect the country's budget and could provide some benefit for future state functions with other world leaders, should have then sat down together to discuss exactly what the reasonable needs of a new ballroom would entail. After all, at different times in the future, each party will occupy the White House, so making the decision together would have been the best avenue to travel so that this ridiculous infighting could have been avoided. In that context, if the current hosting capacity to seat approximately 200 people is not at times enough, then together they could jointly decide how much would be. Would 300 people be sufficient? 400? Reasonable, matured leadership should be able to come to an honest assessment of what that number should be and then agree to build the appropriate structure. Because, quite frankly, I don't think that most of us Americans would believe that the level of our government hosting state functions should exceed a capacity of 300 or 400 persons. After all, anything beyond that would seem unnecessarily extravagant. Yet, how is it that when a politician openly makes a claim concerning a government policy or an actual legal decision for a country that is clearly based upon their own egos or on their effort to focus solely on their party's agendas, that many Americans can't seem to acknowledge how that clearly contradicts their immature public outcries of how they only have the needs of the people at heart? Now, in this particular case, we have what a mature, rational person would consider an unnecessarily extravagant ballroom being for our White House that will be approximately 90,000 square feet in size. That means this new ballroom will be approximately 35,000 square feet larger than the White House itself, adorned with immensely over the top furnishings, and possess a seating capacity of approximately 1,000 people. This whole fiasco of such immature conduct by those who are screaming that Trump's ballroom is a celebration of his being a king and of his own ego driven design of a ballroom that is probably 3 times larger than what our needs are is a clear testament of the lack of bipartisan maturity in our government. Something as insignificant as building a ballroom in our White House to host state functions that would adequately accommodate any and all of his future needs should never have resulted in the childish infighting we are having to witness from politicians who claim to be so mature and so well equipped to govern this land, especially since it will not cost the taxpayer a penny. Maturity tells us that since both parties share the White House, Donald Trump should have put aside his ego, invited Democrats to discuss the plan with him, and then jointly offered out a plan to the people that was grounded in the mature, bipartisan conclusion as to how their plan would fulfill just what the intent of the need was. Instead, Trump went solo and authorized the extravagant abundance of that which is currently being built, and as usual, the Democrats lost their minds simply because they hate him. His knowing that Democrats will always oppose anything he does makes it clear that he should have went about this in a better way by inviting them into the decision-making process. Yet despite that, Democrats must stop overreacting to everything Trump does with such childish fervor simply because they cannot stand him being in the right about anything he may do. They must cease immaturely promoting false narratives that enrage their constituents to the point of causing a hostility based division in the country. After all, whenever Democrat presidents do things that Republicans don't like, you don't see them planning riots, violence, or hostile opposition that breaks the law. You don't see them overtaking schools and streets. Such conduct is incredibly immature, and quite frankly, leadership who supports such conduct is the epitome of what political immaturity really is. The demonstrated lack of maturity being continually revealed by certain politicians and legacy media to divide us is the gasoline fueling the fire that is the real threat this country is facing. Communist and socialist agendas being promoted by certain far-left politicians like Zoran Madami in New York, AOC, Bernie Sanders, and others have already brought the Democratic leadership to his knees and because of that are gaining ground in this country. Neither of these types of government have ever historically done anything else but afflict and torment its people. Extreme poverty, oppression, and affliction of the people are what always results from communism and socialism, which is why so many of those who live in such countries escape to the United States. Yet, despite that knowledge, the immature song and dance of division being played out over such insignificant issues like this ballroom is further seducing the younger generation to embrace these harmful ideologies. In many circumstances, both parties could come out looking so good if they were demonstrating mature, reasonable approaches to governing, but more times than not, they choose the path of stubborn childishness. They need to remember that they are supposed to be representing what is good for our people, not their pathetic unwillingness to be mature enough to embrace what is truly right for us, regardless of which side of the political aisle comes up with the idea. Many of our political leaders need to abandon their primary objective of simply fighting the other party and return to making fighting for the people their sole focus. Only then can we hopefully expect leaders to put aside their egos and self serving party agendas, whereby they would then be both willing and capable of supporting what is best for the people, regardless of which party is leading the charge. So, what do you think? Should this ballroom thing have been handled differently by both Trump and the Democrats? Do you agree that the drama of this issue was easily avoidable if leadership would have just sat down and come to rational, mature decisions concerning it? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget the usual: like, subscribe, and share the video, as again, that really helps me out a lot. Well, that's it for me today. As always, I would just like to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to listen. May God richly bless you and yours, and until next time,